so the case is asking the court to declare this tax unconstitutional. But if the court does it, they will be reaffirming going forward and sending a clear message to Congress and the White House that any attempt to tax unrealized gains or wealth is unconstitutional unless it's apportioned, which it never will be done. And I don't want to get into apportionment again on this podcast. I don't have that much time. I've talked about that on other podcasts and why it's so important. Remember, the U.S. government doesn't have unlimited taxing power. The taxing power is limited by the Constitution, specifically when it comes to direct taxes. The framers of the Constitution did not want the U.S. government to even levy direct taxes unless it was an emergency, like a war. That's why they made it so difficult. That's why they subjected it to the rule of apportionment. They believed that most government revenue during peacetime would come from excise taxes, which don't have to be apportioned. They just have to be uniform throughout the 50 states. I mean, 50 now, 13 back then. But it was very difficult to levy a direct tax. The income tax was declared unconstitutional. We got the 16th Amendment to allow the government to tax income without apportionment, but nothing else. All other forms of direct taxation, if they're not on income, are still subject to the constitutional rule of apportionment. And again, the meaning of income must be set by the courts, and it has been set. The government cannot change it. Now, we'll see what happens because, look, the courts ruled that the student debt relief was unconstitutional, yet that hasn't stopped the Biden administration from now tweaking the laws on student debt forgiveness. They've now changed it on their own again. And so you only have to pay, if it's an income-based repayment plan, you only have to pay 5% of your income in repayments. And now after 10 years, if your total debt is $12,000 or less, the entire thing gets forgiven. So what that means is if you borrow $37,000 and you earn $50,000 a year on average over 10 years, after 10 years, you're fully repaid on your loan after only paying back 67.5% of the principal and no interest. So what that means is nobody is going to pay $37,000 if they can borrow $37,000 and just pay back $25,000 with no interest over 10 years. So the government encourages people who might otherwise have paid for college to borrow the money instead because they're not going to have to pay it back. But what's even more significant is when you have these income qualifications, no more than 5% of your income, you're kind of indifferent between borrowing $37,000 or borrowing $100,000 or $200,000, because regardless, your payments, your monthly payments are the same. The colleges know this. They take advantage of this by jacking up tuitions even farther. Tuition has skyrocketed since Obama came in and took over the student loans, which is exactly what I predicted. You know, every time the government makes it easier for people not to repay their student loans, to pay back less than they owe, the result of that is that student loan debt grows even faster. College tuitions rise even higher. That's why we have better than $1.81 trillion of student debt. It's because of what the government is doing. And based on what the Biden administration just did, right, this is a green light for more debt, higher tuition. And so we're going to hit $3 trillion in college debt a lot sooner as a result of what the Biden administration is doing. Hopefully, we'll get a way to get this thrown out too, but it's very difficult to get stuff up to the Supreme Court, which is why I think it's so important that we get a ruling on this direct tax case. You know, the government might try to argue that, well, you know, we can't have the government rule on a tax that hasn't even been imposed. That's true, but this particular unconstitutional tax on deemed repatriation as income, that's there. That's a new tax. It's never been done before. So the Supreme Court could strike it down without completely unraveling the income tax, which really should be done because pretty much every aspect of the income tax is unconstitutional, but the court is not being asked to make that sweeping of a ruling. It's just on this one extreme example of an unconstitutional tax. But if the court rules this way, it will effectively create a barrier to future taxes of a estate tax, which is much better than waiting for the government to actually impose an unconstitutional, unapportioned direct tax on wealth, and then wait for somebody else to challenge it and make it all the way up to the Supreme Court, because that could take years to happen. And in the meantime, the damage would be substantial, having people pay this tax and then having the government refund the money years later. It's much better for the Supreme Court to get out in front of it, and hopefully the government will listen to the court. But I wanted to finish up the podcast, though, by talking about my own case. The Daily Wire did an excellent expose on what happened to me and my bank. And this article came out last week, and it was very well received by the Daily Wire audience, the people who are normally looking at that content. What's surprising me, although I guess it doesn't surprise me because nothing surprised me at this point, but that no other conventional media sources, even websites, nobody is picking up on this story. This, I think, is a huge story of government corruption. And again, this is not just some flunky, some lowly IRS agent. This is all the way at the top. This is the number one cop at the IRS. And he has roped into this conspiracy the top cops in Australia, in the UK, in Canada. This is all the way at the top of 5 countries that have conspired, right, to present this false narrative, right? To not they didn't just destroy my bank just to get me. I mean, yeah, they wanted to get me, but this is something much bigger at stake here. They are trying to intimidate people based on this action. But also, more important than that, look what they did to me. Because if the government can do this to me, then they can do it to anybody, right? If they can tear up the Constitution to get me, well, then they can tear it up to get anybody. Again, it's like the camel's nose under the tent. It's like the SEC going after these convertible debt traders. They get away with this, then they can expand and get everybody ensnared in the same net. The same thing here. If the government can do this to me, again, what did they do to me? They investigated me for crimes based solely on my political views that I have expressed, by my freedom of speech. So they said, here's this Peter Schiff guy. We don't like what he's saying politically. And so we're going to investigate him criminally because maybe he's committing crimes, and then we can put this guy in jail for the crimes that he committed, right? And then they can silence me that way. Well, they launched this massive criminal investigation and they find nothing, right? There may be 8 or 9 months into the investigation, and they're getting very frustrated because they're finding absolutely no evidence that I broke any laws. Because just like was reported by the Daily Wire, I am not an idiot. I am not going to break the laws that I publicly criticize. The people who criticize the laws follow the laws. The people who break the laws keep quiet about it. They want to fly beneath the radar. You don't criticize laws and then break them. You do what Sam Bankman-Fried did. You praise the laws and then you break them, right? You want to pretend that you're following the laws and that you love the laws. You pretend that you don't even care about making money. You don't even want to make money. You're just an altruist, right? You want to be one of the good guys. You virtue signal and then you break the law, right? Well, I didn't virtue signal. I didn't play any of those games. I was honest, and I honestly criticized the tax laws. I honestly criticized the Patriot Act and the anti-money laundering laws. And one of the reasons that I was able to criticize them was because I abided by them. And I knew firsthand how destructive they were, how much they cost everybody, not just in money, but in loss of freedom, in loss of liberty. I don't like these laws from so many different vantage points, and I criticize them. And because I criticize them, I got targeted. But anyway, they find out that I haven't broken any laws. This massive, global, unprecedented investigation was a complete waste of time. So what do? Do they end the investigation? No, they leak the investigation to the media. They tell the media that they believe that we're doing all this stuff, knowing they have no evidence that we did it. But they tell the media, hey, we think Peter Schiff and his bank did all this bad stuff. And now the media takes that leaked information, which was illegally leaked, and now they run all these stories to say, hey, Peter Schiff is under this massive investigation, unprecedented in size. 5 governments from around the world are all investigating him and his bank. Well, gee, I must be guilty. I mean, if 5 governments are after me, I mean, God, I got to be guilty. The bank's got to be guilty, right? I mean, after all, this is unprecedented. We've got the top cops on this case, right? I must be guilty. And then, of course, oh, my God, he's a free market conservative. He's a libertarian. Well, sure, that just solidifies it, right? And then they use my politics to claim I'm guilty, right? Then nothing happens, right? The government keeps on investigating me for another year, hoping they're going to find something. They come up completely empty. They investigate thousands of accounts. They can't find a single example of any account being used for money laundering